Welcome, Rabbi Yaakov Hoffman. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
As promised, we are continuing our conversation that we had with other rabbinical coordinators. We've reached out to them because we work together, and there were many questions that came in as people were learning Maseches Avodah Zarah. Some of the questions that came in related to Chosamos, and we felt that Rabbi Hoffman is best suited to answer some of these questions. So, by way of introduction, how long have you been at the OU, and why particularly are you the one to answer the Chosamos questions?
I've been at the OU 4 years. None of my areas in Kashrus are really that connected to Chosamos per se, but one time I was doing a planned visit. I don't want to say where exactly, of course. And I noticed that there were a lot of problems regarding the Chosamos. So I was trying to work with the other RCs and trying to improve the situation. And then I think in my shul, I'm also the rabbi of shul in Washington Heights. So I was giving a shiurim on Chosamos so my balabatim could understand, what's the issue if they get a delivery from a restaurant or something like that. So I had a whole presentation. So Rabbi Elf asked me to give it one of the OU events, and that's how I got involved in that sugya.
Excellent. Okay, so that's a great segue. Just basic halacha maskana, as concise as we could. What needs chosamos, and how many chosamos would these items need?
The basic idea is something that's very kosher sensitive requires chosamos. So the Gemara says that meat, fish, tcheles, and wine require 2 chosamos, and cheese, milk, and bread require only 1 chosam. So it doesn't say explicitly what the difference is. So the Rishonim give different explanations, whether it has to do with money, or whether it has to do with that it's the Isser Be'en rather than like some sort of Tarivus. And the main sheet on the Rishonim that we accept halacha is that has to do with Deraisa versus Derabanan. That something that is potentially an Isser Deraisa requires 2 chosamos, and something that could only be an Isser Derabanan requires only 1 chosam. The obvious difficulty with that is that the Gemara mentions wine as one of the things that requires 2 chosamos, and wine is generally only Asar Midrabanan. So because for the prohibitions of Yenesef Stam Yenam, so Chazal were very machmir. There is also the differences for the other things. The general issue is that the question is that when you send these items with a goy and it's not constantly under Jewish supervision, so the issue is only that he might switch it that for something not kosher. Whereas with wine, it could be the exact same item, but even if he only touched it, or in worst case scenario, if he actually was made a libation to Avodah Zarah with it, so then no one's going to be the wiser. It could be the exact same wine, and the goyim in the olden days were very driven to do this when they had access to wine. So therefore, even though it's only derabanan, fundamentally, so Chazal are machmer with it to require 2 chosamos.
Okay, excellent. So let's dive right into the practical. What does a wine bottle or grape juice bottle have today for its 2 chosamos? And we could point out now something that's mavushal doesn't need a chosam at all, or may need 1 chosam. You'll talk about that, but certainly doesn't need the same level as chosamos as non-mavushal. So talk about that.
Right. So because of this issue that we mentioned, that really the reason that needs 2 chosam is only because of the concern for nisoch. So something where there's no concern for nisoch, but only that he might switch it with a non-kosher product, requires only 1 chosam for sure. So the Gemara says explicitly that wine, vinegar, wine vinegar, and mavushal wine, so it's not subject to the stringencies of full-fledged non-mavushal wine. So therefore, that for sure only requires 1 chosam. That's not a question. And the truth is that the Taz even says that nowadays, even non-mavushal wine technically should require only 1 chosam, because the goyim are not driven to do nisoch the same way as they used to be. They don't do nisoch privately with wine, maybe part of a religious service, but only in limited circumstances. So the Taz says that really 1 chosam is sufficient for even non-mavushal wine now. But l'chatchila, we still, b'diavad, the poskim are basically all willing to rely on this Taz. But the question then arises for Sefardim, that Sefardim generally treat non-mavushal wine nowadays with the same stringency as in the times of Chazal, even though the Goyim are not practically going to be Menasech. Maybe it could be accepted even for Sefardim also, but certainly for Ashkenazi poskim, so very quick to accept that b'diavad b'lechatchila, we'd still try to rely on what the Gemara says, explicitly, that you need 2 chaysamis for non-mevushal wine. Again, even Sefardim would say that if the wine is only going to be in the possession, for sure it's only going to be in the possession of a goy. Not just that we're not concerned that he's not, that he doesn't he's not going to be menasef the wine himself, but he doesn't worship avodah zarah at all, like a Muslim or an atheist or just someone who's no shaykhis to these things. So then you would definitely only need 1 choisam. But nevertheless, again, all the kashrus agencies, as far as I'm aware, still insist that non-mevushal wine have 2 choisamis. Again, that's the traditional way, it says in the Gemara, and for various concerns, just let it be glat lechatchila. So what constitutes 2 chaysamis? So one thing to keep in mind is that when we talk about 2 chaysamis versus 1 chaysam, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's 1 thing versus 2 things. It means that the Meiri says this explicitly, and Rishonim, you could deduce it that this is not a controversial thing. I don't think it's a machlokes. It's just that the Meiri says it mamish explicitly, and that's accepted by the Achronim as well. That when we say 2 versus 1, it has to do with quality versus not quantity per se. So if you have 1 thing, but it would take a tremendous amount of effort to forge it, so that's considered still 2 chaysamis. The Rishonim say if you have 1 thing, but you write 2 Hebrew letters on it in a place where goyim don't know how to write Hebrew at all. It's another thing that the poskim mention. I think the early Achronim, they say that if in a place where goyim know how to write, so then Hebrew doesn't count. So nowadays, you look on the internet, you could come up with any Hebrew phrase you want. So just Hebrew letters per se don't count as a chaysam now. But you 2 things. So therefore, if you have something that's impossible to forge, again, it doesn't have to be absolutely foolproof, but just that no goy in his right mind is going to put forth the effort to forge this, so that's considered 2 chaysamis. And something that's only 1 tircha to forge, that is considered 1 chaysam. So you'll see wine bottles and grape juice bottles. Again, all grape juice maker adin is really all mevushal. It says on some grape juice bottles non-mevushal because it doesn't adhere to a higher shear of how hot some poskim hold it needs to be in order to be mevushal. But maker adin, all grape juice is mevushal, otherwise it would spoil unless you mamish squeeze grapes and drink it right away. So a grape juice bottle and some wine bottles you see have a screw cap. So a screw cap is 1 thing, not 2 things. But you see, even non-mevushal wine with the best ashgachis, sometimes with a screw cap. So the answer is, in order to forge a screw cap, you need to get the specialized equipment that they have in factories to fix the things to the bottles, the cap to the bottles, and you'd have to get a cap that is exactly the right tzura, and if it has the logo of the ashgacha or the winery, it just way too much to forge. And that's considered 2 chaysamis again, even though grape juice and mevushal wine, technically speaking, only requires 1. That would still be considered sufficient even for non-mevushal wine. But most non-mevushal wines, and nicer mevushal wines, they don't have a screw cap. They have a cork, and you have something over the cork that's called a capsule. They put a piece of foil or plastic over. So technically speaking, just the capsule is considered 2 chaysamis because, again, usually it has some sort of logo on it. So in order to be able to forge it, a guy would have to make the logo by himself and order the material for the capsules and get the equipment to put the capsules on the bottles. It's way too much. Again, if it's just blank, so then maybe that would only be 1 chaysam, potentially. So it's really better. Again, I'm not saying b'diavad it's a problem. That's not at all. But lechatchila, it's better to have something on the capsule to make it apparent that it's kosher, the logo of the ashgacha. If you're talking about an all kosher winery, the logo of the winery would be sufficient. That would be best. Or you put a hologram. There's some wines that you'll see that there's like a hologram over the connection. I have a picture here actually, if you want to see it. If you have like a hologram that goes over the capsule and onto the bottle. So once you take the capsule off, so you're going to destroy the hologram. And holograms are very, very difficult to forge. So those are excellent to chaysamis. The cork is potentially more of a problem because the cork can go in and out without being destroyed. So if you take the cork out, again, most of the time you can use a corkscrew that punches a hole in it. So then somebody would realize that it had been tampered with. But technically speaking, you could take the cork out without puncturing it and put it back in the bottle. Might be a little hard. So some people hold that let's say the capsule is shvach for some reason as a chosam. So some people would hold that the cork, since it's still a little difficult, that would count as one. So then put together, that would have the din of two chosamas. But not everybody accepts that since the cork, again, does not get destroyed or crumpled or in any way like the capsule does. So not everybody accepts that a cork is a chosam. But again, for most wine bottles, you wouldn't even need the cork because the capsule itself would be considered two chosamas.
So I would think that the screw cap also may be easy to turn on and off without the added layers of plastic around it without destroying.
Well, the screw cap, you have the little ring on the bottom that separates from it when you open the bottle. That's why, so many poskim don't allow opening those things on Shabbos because they're making the clear something. Yeah, but just the thing that screws on without anything that breaks off when you open the bottle. That's nothing. That's no chayson. That's zero. Yeah, for sure. But if you have a screw cap that's not sealed on, plus wrapping over that would be fine. Sure.
Excellent. Fine. So you covered the way we seal wine bottles and grape juice bottles. How is meat and chicken sealed today? Someone asked practically, right? You go to the store, you'll buy chicken. Let's just say Empire chicken has a nice cellophane wrap around it. How do we look at that as two chesamas?
That's based on the same yesod that you don't need two things. You need something that's really, really difficult to forge. So in order for someone to forge the Empire's plastic wrapping, you would need to order matching plastic wrap, get the equipment that puts it on, which at another chicken factory you might have, but not at not a normal individual person. And you need to get it designed in the exact same way, and you have to forge the logo, which also is a violation of secular law. You can get prosecuted for that. That's a motivation not to do that. And the specific designs, each of which could potentially be considered a chaysam, so you could consider that many chaysamas. So that's why the meat and with one plastic wrapper, again with a very specific design and the logo of the company. So that is considered a two chaysamis, and that's perfectly fine to buy chicken or meat with that type of packaging in a goyish store. And just lemaisa, we've never heard, as far as I'm aware. I asked my older, more experienced colleagues as well. And when you have kashrus forgeries and violations, Rahman al-Islam, it shouldn't happen at all. But when it does, it's at the retail level. Like you have butchers that are having issues or selling meat that they shouldn't be selling or something like that. We've never heard in the entire history of industrial kashrus that you had another chicken factory that was packaging their chicken with Empire wrap. It just doesn't happen. So you see that it's a very good system.
Excellent. Okay, now this comes up all the time, especially in today's society where everybody is always ordering food. Somebody orders food from a restaurant and the seals seem problematic. They're not sealed properly. May I eat the food?
That is, yes, that is definitely an issue that all of us have had at one time or another. There's been something off with the Chosamos. You see it all the time, unfortunately. But b'diavad, there is usually a heter. It doesn't mean you're b'diavad because if you eat the food. It means l'maisa you're allowed to eat the food. It just they didn't make the Chosamas in the correct way. So sometimes there's a gap, even if they seal the bag with tape. So sometimes you could take the food out of the bag and put it back in without breaking the tape. So that's not good. L'chatchila, it should definitely not be done. It should be sealed with tape, a controlled tape. Sometimes you see in restaurants goyim walking around with a kosher tape. That's not good. So in such situation, you could say maybe the mashgiach should really sign each package of delivery. I don't know if that's practical, but that would certainly be better. But b'diavad, there are a few heterim. One is that when the goy is in a public place, so then there's no concern he's going to switch, because if somebody sees him in the street messing, putting something else in the bag that he's holding, is clearly a delivery person. So then somebody's going to say, what's going on, even if you don't necessarily have a way to contact the restaurant and tell them what's going on. He's going to be afraid to that people are going to see him. So when something is brought derech reshus harabim, so that would be one heter. Again, even in the poskim it says not to rely on this lechatchila. But but that was one heter. One heter is if you know what the food from the restaurant looks like. If they sent you exactly what you ordered, a hamburger with French fries and a salad and the exact dressing you ordered, there's no way that this delivery person is going to make something that looks exactly like what you ordered and switch it. If you put the receipt on it and it's like stapled to it, so and sometimes I don't know, for restaurants not really, but if you have a butcher who's delivering, so it puts the weight of the meat, and he would have to get a piece of meat that's the exact same weight. So again, lechatchila, it should be completely sealed in a way that it cannot be opened without destroying the seal. But b'diavad, there is usually, I'm not saying always, but there is usually a heter to eat the food if the chosam was not done properly.
So, in short, you gave us the answer for those that are learning, but if it happens, practically ask your local Orthodox rabbi how to proceed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you could tell the mashgiach at the restaurant. That's another thing.
Absolutely. I know it's happened. It happened recently. My wife was at some conference in Atlanta, and there aren't that many kosher restaurants there, and she was like 25 minutes away from the place, and it came not sealed the way it was, and she actually was in touch with the mashgiach and the kashrus agency, to look over the procedures there.
And another thing that you just reminded me actually is that if there is a sheet on the Rishonim that you don't need two Chosamos if you know what the Chosam looks like. In other words, if somehow now they didn't have texting back then, but a contemporary application of this would be like if the mashgiach would text you a picture of the way he makes the Chosam, even if it's not a great Chosam, or a picture of the package of food or something, and he can verify that this is the one he sent. So then that's another heter. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. 2 more questions and we'll wrap up. Someone has a wine bottle and the cork and capsule are loose and could easily be replaced. I don't know how common that is, but I guess it happens. Can I drink the wine?
I think it used to be more common. I haven't had this problem in a while. I remember when I was, 15 years ago, I feel like it happened more often where you take off the capsule from the bottle of wine and nothing happens. It doesn't crumple. It doesn't break. It just pulls off and you can put it back on. It looks exactly the same. So that again, lechatchila, that should absolutely not be done. The Rama writes that if you have a similar situation based on a Trumas Hadeshen, you could argue with it potentially, but Lemais, the Rama writes that if you could be toila, that any goyim who looked at this bottle of wine wouldn't notice that there was anything off about the chosam, and they'd still be afraid to tamper with it. So then b'diavad, you could drink the wine, but again, you should write to the hashgacha agency, and they should make sure that in the future their chosamas are better.
Okay, excellent. You mentioned this briefly. Maybe just elaborate a little bit more. The difference between Sefardim and Ashkenazim regarding the required chosamos on wine bottles. They have different standards. Maybe just talk about it directly, what the different standards are, and then what could be a nafkamina, a difference in how they treat stam yena.
So the basic difference is that there's a machlokes rishonim, and it's reflected in the Shulchan Aruch as to, well, first of all, the Rambam writes that if it's based on, I think, the Geonim, but it's not explicit in Chazal. I think some Rishonim, if I'm not mistaken, disagree with this. But we don't accept that. We accept this kula, which is that if a goy is not oived avodah zarah, so everything drops down a level if he handles wine. So if the Gemara says it's asur bahana, this wine, so it only becomes asur b'shtia. You could get benefit from it, but you're not allowed to drink it. If the Gemara says it's asur b'shtia, meaning even in the times of the Gemara, so you would have been allowed to derive benefit from it, just not drink it. So then it becomes mutter completely even to drink. So that's the Rambam says the Rambam says it goes down a level. So therefore, it should only require one chosam if again you know that it was only under the auspices of goyim who do not worship avodah zarah. The other Rishonim apply this even more, that they say that if a goy could be presumed not to be menasech, even if he does worship avodah zarah, and this was the main application of this was Catholics So again, I'm not getting involved in machlokes of avodah zarah, not avodah zarah, but assuming that there are avodah zarah, but individuals are not authorized to perform ritual observances with wine. It's only the priest in the church who is allowed to do any sort of religious ritual with wine. So stam handling wine, it's not shaykh that is going to be menasechet. Or I don't know, Hindus with the Zara, but they're not. I don't know if they use wine in their rituals. I don't know, but they those types of the avodah zarah, they could be presumed not to be menasech the wine. They apply the kula the same way. That is not asur bahana. So the nafkamina could be whether the wine requires two chosamos, that the taz based on this idea that is the goyim nowadays don't have the chibas nisuch anymore. They're not driven to be menasech wine like they used to in the times of Chazal. At any party, the part of the festivities was the libations of avodah zarah. But nowadays that they don't, so it only requires one chosam. But again, it could be that the Sephardic poskim would accept that, because again, it doesn't have to do with the etzim status of the wine. It's just the concern that it might be switched or it might have been menasech. It's not really undoing Chazal's gezerah, which the Sephardic poskim assume was it's absolute, regardless of whether it really applies to today's goyim. So again, but even Ashkenazim should be makpid on two chosamos for non-mevusel wine. And but then maybe room even for Sefardim, the question would just be conceptually how much to go with it and how much to accept it and what type of shasat chak.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for spending some time with us, and I'm sure this will be enlightening to the many people who just touched upon the Gemaras that mention the laws of Chosamos. Thank you, Rabbi Hoffman.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.